What do you think of the idea of an open source metaverse? Imagine all of your bias against Second Life, but imagine Second Life open source.
Been pushing for that for day one, and that would solve many of my problems.
Many problems.
With it. My main problem with Second Life is this notion that someone wants me to contribute my creativity and my energy to a world where the entire architecture and entire infrastructure is owned by a for-profit corporation which has built itself around pornography and real estate. And it's very, very hard for me to decide that, that's where I want to put the locus of my creativity. So I would love to see some sort of open source metaverse project take on. Now, similarly, I would love to see an open library project take off, an open search project take off. Now, there's one question in all of this which comes up, which is, okay, so Google strikes a deal with Harvard. It's non-exclusive. Brewster Kahle comes along and says, oh, by the way, I'll do this as well. So, first hand it to Google, they'll scan it, and then hand it to me and we'll scan it. Well, Brewster is up in arms about the Google deals. And one of the reasons he's up in arms about the Google deals is that, frankly, it's just so much damn work that it seems really silly to do that work twice. I see this in some ways as Brewster saying he's not going to do that work. In fact, if you look at where Brewster's focusing, Brewster is really focusing on things that aren't going to get covered by this, because I think Brewster believes in some sort of long term there's going to be a tectonic shift in the way that we view information, and this stuff is going to become available either via licensing or either via legal change. But what I want to put on the table is this question of what projects are so big that once you have a first mover advantage in it, even if it sucks, it's really, really hard to unseat it. I would argue that search is very much one of these problems. Having helped run a very, very large search engine for a long, long time, that is really hard to do. And the notion of going head-to-head with Google is such a stupid idea that only the French are taking it on. Building an open source metaverse.
It's not even right-wing radio.
Clearly intended as a joke for anyone who's not getting the irony in all of this.
My blog's in Paris tonight.
Cursing your name.
Where I spoke last year and had a good time. Where I spoke last year.
You meant that ironically.
I meant it ironically. Put the irony tags Similarly, I wonder whether Second Life is actually going to sort of suck the air out of the space for an open source metaverse. Certainly at the first Metaverse Roadmap Summit, this was talked about all the time. Certainly the Second Lifers have said all the right stuff about making APIs accessible and so on and so forth. But the fact of the matter is, this is a largely closed universe, but it's a largely closed universe with an incredible hype machine behind it. And it's very, very hard to get over that popularity barrier. So one of the things that I just think is really worth thinking about in all of these things is, sure, it can be open, you can decide to open it up, you can decide to make this stuff available, but what if no one uses it because you can't get sufficient momentum behind it? So anyway, that's where all of that starts taking
let me say, I am with you in a very large degree. I've developed this course in Second Life, and I am, at this point, part of the hype machine.
Yes.
In Second Life.
Yes, you are.
And it has just these worries that you're talking about. At the same time, it's an extraordinary environment in which to reimagine education. And the whole issue of internet governance came clearer to me through this experience than anything before. I mean, we started here with ICANN, thinking ICANN was internet governance. Well, here was governance in Second Life. A guy who was a participant in Second Life had bought some real estate. You basically buy server space. But he had somehow figured out how the auction system was working. He hacked it. And he was able to hack into Second Life's auction and get a whole bunch of property for practically nothing. And Second Life kind of clued into this as it was going on. I'm not absolutely sort of that these are the facts. This is just the way I understand the hypothetical. And their first instinct was to say, oh, we see this, something's been jimmied. We'll reverse those transactions and give you your money back. But then when they saw how extensive it was, they said, out, you're gone. We take all your property, we cut you out. And the user agreement completely permitted it, of course, because the user agreement was written by good lawyers who gave every conceivable arbitrary power to Second Life in dealing with users. Well, there was a problem that was in a lawyer's sense. But if you were a citizen of Second Life, if you were somebody else in Second Life, you suddenly said to yourself, these are the due process rights I have? I'm in an environment here. This company is my government. And immediately, what falls out is, if we're going to do internet governance in a serious way, it's got to be an open source metaverse.
Not only that, Charlie, it's the only game in town, in the sense that you have now made such a significant investment of your time and intellectual property in creating the tools in the space that you teach in, that were you to then try to lead the Second Life revolt, and their response to your revolutionary speech and activities was to shut you out of it, that might be too much of a price for you to pay.
Might be too much for them to pay.
That's another possibility, but it also might be too much of a price for you to pay.
I think
Charlie's
you
a
should
bad
try it.
example in terms of this, because he does have so much prestige associated with this.
Actually.
But comparing this to the sort of scenario that I always end up comparing this to, which is web page hosting, which is the business that I used to be in, you could always take your HTML and go run it somewhere else because it was open, and you can go and move it somewhere else. Nobody else runs this stuff. And I just don't get it. I literally do not get what is going through the heads of people who decide to make an investment in working in this space. I do not get what you're doing, Charlie. I think it's crazy.
Well,
Whoa.
all right. So let me tell you what we're interested in doing. There's a project called Croquet, which is the beginning of a
Been
university
following it for 10 years
consortium
now. Yeah.
that is developing an open source metaverse.
Yes.
And we would like to connect with them and
Yes.
amplify that, and basically see what we can do to develop there.
Croquet
It
is an
didn't exist
entirely different paradigm. It's Croquet, for folks who haven't seen it, is an entirely client-to-client based paradigm. Essentially what happens is you create a three-dimensional environment which is rendered by your own machine. When you move into someone else's space, you are literally moving onto their machine and moving onto their rules. And those are their rules as far as the physics of the universe, those are their rules as far as the ownerships of the objects and the ownerships of the code. It has been put together by an utterly brilliant, four of the sort of smartest programmers sort of ever to walk the earth. The problem is the development of it has been just glacial. I remember playing with an early alpha 5 years ago, and then I looked recently and we're still in pretty early alpha. But it would be amazing if you could generate the momentum for it. And similarly, at the Metaverse Summit, they demoed Croquet extensively, and people were blown away by it. And not only were they blown away because it's very visually beautiful and it's a very rich environment, but they were blown away by this notion that the work that they were doing is something that they could own and sort of put on screens. But I guess if I were to pick a fight with you, which I guess I've done, which I haven't really wanted to today, but I'm in a craptastic mood. I don't really understand why you've let yourself be used as part of Second Life's hype machine, as opposed to embracing something like this that seems much, much closer to your principles and your values.
Sounds like a
You
good panel
could
for
have
the
I was going to say,
You could have-
can we appear?
You could have been the key user for Croquet. You could have, and you still can. But you could have sat down with Dave Reed on the other side of town and been the alpha users for Croquet, because the thing that they need more than anything else is an actual user base to prove that this thing is real. Instead, what's happened is you are now, along with Angie Chung, one of the 4 stories of something interesting in Second Life. And so every single frickin' Business Week story on this is now going to mention you, and Harvard University's embrace of this platform. You have given them tens of millions of dollars in marketing. And what have they given you back, Charlie? I mean, talk about the deal with Google. I mean, you did this out in public and fully visibly.
I guess we're
All right. This is a great issue.
Apparently, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
All right.
Wow.
Meeting adjourned.
Should we mention for anyone who doesn't know how much I love you? Just so that people don't understand that this is not a fist fight that's going to continue into the
It's
hallway.
tough
So,
love.
yeah.
It's tough.
It's tough love. It's tough love.
Charlie, consider that an intervention.
Thank you, Charlie.
Wow.